The wave equation is a really important equation when we're calculating things about waves. For example, the wavelength or the frequency or the speed. So this triangle shows us how we kind of do those calculations. So the velocity units is really important in physics. So I'm going to go through them quickly. The velocity is always measured in meters per second, or m per second. Frequency is always measured in hertz, so that's written as Hz, and the wavelength here, so this is lambda, is always measured in meters. So it's always velocity, frequency, and wavelength. So this is the wave equation. And there's another key equation which you can use to calculate information about waves. And this is down here. This is the period is always equal to 1 divided by the frequency, or the frequency is always equal to 1 divided by the period. So this is the wave equation. The speed of the wave is equal to the frequency times the wavelength. And this is how to figure out the period or the frequency. Period is always equal to 1 divided by frequency, or frequency always equals 1 divided by period. So I'll just give you a couple of examples here. Again, using this triangle here, once we have any two of these symbols, any two of these values, we can figure out the third. So if we've got been given the frequency and the wavelength, then the velocity is equal to frequency times wavelength. If we've been given we want to figure out the frequency, we've got the velocity and the wavelength, then the frequency is equal to the velocity divided by the wavelength. And the last one here, if we want to figure out the wavelength, we've got the velocity and the frequency, then the equation is wavelength equals velocity divided by frequency. So an example of that is I'll just use one of figuring out velocity. So here I've given the frequency of a wave is 50 hertz, so the wave is occurring 50 times per second. And it's traveling, the wavelength, of this wave is 10 centimeters, so 0.1 of a meter. We've got to have those units correct. So this wave, how fast is, if it's going 50 times per second and the wavelength is 1 meter, then in fact the velocity of that wave is 5 meters per second. So 50 times 0.1, the velocity or the speed of this wave, it's traveling at 5 meters every second. So that's really quite fast, I suppose. And you can see how you can use any one of these equations up here to calculate either the velocity or the frequency or the wavelength. A quick example of figuring out if we want to figure out the wavelength of the wave, but we haven't been given the frequency, we've only been given the period or something, and that we can use this other equation here. So in this example, if I want to figure out the frequency and I've been given the period, then the period here, so the period is one wave goes past every 0.05 of a second, then the frequency of that wave is going to be 1 divided by 0.05, so it's 20 times per second, or 20 hertz. So these two equations here, frequency equals 1 divided by the period. That's a great way to figure out the frequency if you've only been given the period. So really that's a bit of a few quick examples of using the wave equation to calculate some of the properties of waves.